Hi everyone, and welcome back for another Miss Ink Stamps video. This is Cassie. Today we have a little bit longer one, but that's because we're going to focus on some coloring. This stamp set we're going to be using today is called Slim's Whims, and I am so excited to color up this boxer. So the sentiments are fabulous, the image is amazing, we're going to have fun here today. So I've got this stamp, and then I do have a couple of stencils. We have the Possum Stencil. It just seemed like a marriage made in heaven, right? You got to have the paws if you got the pup. And then we also have the Perfectly Plaid Stencil. This is a fabulous one as well. We're going to be making a 5x7 card. I went ahead and already cut down a panel. This is a little smaller than 5x7, but I'm going to show you how this plaid stencil is a continuous stencil, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I do want to use some PIXIE spray on this. I'm going to take it outside, spray the PIXIE spray on the back. That will just ensure that there's a little bit of tack on the back of that stencil without making it too sticky. But it'll make it so that stencil stays where it's supposed to go. So obviously you see this is a 6x6 stencil, and what we're using is bigger than that, but we can work with that because the pattern is continuous. So I'll take a little bit of mint tape and cover the bottom here. I don't want that to go beyond. And then we've got an array of distress inks that we're going to use. This first one is some Evergreen BOUGH. And we're just going to blend that all over that background. I don't care if it's splotchy. In fact, I kind of want it to be a little bit. I'm just going to blend all over that background. It's darker in some areas, lighter in others, but that'll add a lot of interest to this background. And this stencil is so cool. We're also going to use it later as well. And then I'm going to bring in some peacock feathers. This is just a great combo. And then you can see that there's some really good variation. So now what I meant by continuous is I can pick this stencil up and I can move it down and line it back up, and then we can keep it going, almost like this stencil was longer than it was supposed to be. I did probably get a little heavy-handed when I was originally doing that top part, but we can cover that up. So we're just going to use some more of that evergreen brown, a little bit of peacock feathers, and then you really can't tell. But this is also where I'm going to bring in our Possum Stencil. And we'll tack that down. And then you'll notice I have a couple more distress ink colors. That color we're going to go ahead and use on the paws is the ground espresso. It'll sort of give it like a grounding for our card, which is nice. And I'll just blend that across that background. And it goes really well with our plaid. Love it. You'll also notice I have some tea dye distress ink there. We're going to use that all on the edges of our background. I really like doing this. I think it gives an aged look, and it just sort of frames up the background a little bit more, and it just adds some fun little bit of texture. Love doing that. And then I do decide I want to add a little bit more texture to our background, so I put some of that peacock feathers on my glass mat, put my image in, or my background into my makeshift splatter box, and then I'm splattering that all over the background. It's very subtle, but it is definitely there, and it does add some interest. So now we have to do our stamping. So I'm going to take our paws, the paws that are holding the cup, we'll ink that up with some Ink on 3 Blackout ink, stamp it down, and then I'm also going to just use the residuals to stamp out a couple of masks. I'm doing this at the top of some Post-its. This will work great. It'll just make sure that I can stick those down where I need to mask later. I'm going to put our pup, our little Slim, in there along with a bow, and we're going to stamp this onto some more of that cream cardstock. This is a Copic friendly cardstock. It's actually Nina. I can't ever seem to find it, but it is out there. Can't find that. White works great. And now we're going to start our coloring. It's a little bit extensive, and I know an image like this can be a little bit intimidating, but don't be. All I did was pulled up a boxer image on Pinterest and kind of followed from there. I've got my W7 marker. I don't have that up on the screen, but it is a W7, and I'm starting with my black images first. I just thought that this would be easier to do it this way and then blend the brown into it. And I'm just sort of adding a little bit of color following the image that I found on Pinterest. So there's lots of different ways that you can color the boxers. I've seen some really cool ways that the rest of the design team has done so. I'm trying to fashion him off of one of my friend's dogs. A lot of my friends have boxers. My sister has a couple of them. They're just great dogs. So I'll bring in the W9 because I typically go lightest to darkest. I am going to work a little bit backwards here. So I did the W9, bringing in that W7, and I'll blend the W9 in a little bit better. And then I'm going to even go a little bit further there. I'm going to bring in some W3 and really try to soften those edges, knowing for sure that I'm going to keep the edges. I mean, it's still going to be a little bit dark in those areas, but it'll soften those just enough. So I'll soften that up, and then I'm going to bring in some W0 and soften up the W3, because a lot of this area on the pup I'm looking at has some good white going on. Then we'll bring in a little bit more for the inside of the nose, blend that out. And then we'll move on to using our browns on the lower part of the body. This color is E37. Sorry, I did not put that up on the screen. And then I go with a mid-tone, which is an E99. It's not a lot darker, but it does add some variation. And then I come in with some E29, which is very dark. And then I'll come back in with that E99. And then I can go even further and blend that more with the E37, but I don't. So I need to bring a little bit of shadowing underneath our pup's chin. So I bring the W3 and then back in with our W0, really softening those edges. And now we can bring in a little bit of pink. So just a little bit of RV11, blend that out with our W0. And then we can start coloring the brown on his face. So I just kind of bring it into where the black is. I don't need it to be blended out, because on the one I'm looking at, there is a good difference between the black and the brown. And so and he also has a white stripe across his forehead, or the top of his forehead. So we're going to do that as well. And we can soften those edges. That's where the W0 comes in handy again. Bringing in our E99. And then I want to add a little bit of expression, because some of these pups have some wrinkles in areas. So I'm going to add a little bit of the E29 on his face in some areas, and then blend that out with the E99. I'm just having fun coloring. Like I said, I know an image like this can sometimes be a little bit intimidating, but don't be. Just go look it up on like Pinterest, or look up just even on Google, boxer dogs, and you'll see many different ways to that they look, and you can just try it out. Try coloring them all different ways. So I'll bring in that E29 in the ears, blend it back with the E99, just a little. And then I'm going to add that RV11 that we had earlier for some pinks in his ears. And I'm blending that pretty decently, trying to soften the edge there. But it works. And then I bring in that W0 for the top of his head, just to blend that out a little bit more. And I love him. I love him so much. And we did the same thing for his paws, just kind of colored those, and I'll bring in the W9 for his nails. And then I'm going to color the coffee using the E29 and the W9. And then I'll blend that out back again with the E29. And then I do want to color the cup. I want to base color down, so we're using BG32. I'm going to just put that all over as a base. Typically, I would then come in with a darker color, but we're going to stencil over this. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a little bit. You can stencil your images by using some masks, which is super fun. All right, and then I'm going to color the bow the same color. And now I'm coloring this upside down. You could absolutely use this as a bow on the top, like it's on her head. But I'm going to make it like a bow tie for around his neck. I did something like this very abstract for a friend of mine, their dog Scout, and I gave him a little blue bow tie because in the picture she sent me, he had one on, and it just made me think of that, so I had to do the same thing. All right, so now we're going to just fussy cut around the pup, and then we're going to cut right on the line for our bow. So I'm cutting right on that line, and then, because I don't want a white line around there, and then we're going to bring in our memento marker and just rub the edges along, or rub the edge of our marker along the edge of our paper. And that'll cover up any white spots. And if you didn't cut perfectly, it'll help there too. So we'll tack this down with a little bit of liquid glue. And then he's got a bow tie. It goes around his neck. That is just so precious. I love it. I love it. All right, and now I do need to cut out my masks. So I'm cutting out the coffee mask at the top. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm not going to reuse these because they were Post-its. So we'll just cut out that top part, and then we're going to cut out his paws. And then after I cut out his paws and attach those down, it's then that I realize I could have just kept the paws in there and cut around the front of them, because you'll see what I'm talking about. When I go to cut out my mug, to fussy cut my mug, I do want to have a little bit of a white border around it. And if I want that, then I need to make sure that I don't have any of the stencil that I plan to use going past the mug. So I need to basically do mask all the way around the mug as well, which is pretty simple. So I'm just sticking this down. There's enough tack at the top that works. And then I notice there's a couple of spots at the top. So I just cut this down and patch around it. Like I said, I'm not keeping these, so it's not a big deal. And then this is where I'm going to bring in our Perfectly Plaid stencil again. I want this to match our background just a little bit. So I'll bring in our Perfectly Plaid stencil, and I'll bring in our evergreen bough along with our peacock feathers, and it gives the exact look that I was going for. So doing stuff like this is kind of fun, and it brings a lot of interest. So then let me pull away our stencil, and I'll pull away our mask, and you'll see this fun little image that we'll be able to fussy cut out very, very simply. I love how that turned out. See, and his little paws are just fine. Love it. All right, so we'll fussy cut around that, leaving a nice white border, like I said. And then we'll start thinking about where we want to place things on the front of our card. And I'm going to go ahead and glue this down. You could do a lot of fun things with, say, foam tape. You could pop him up with some foam tape, pop up the mug as well. And you could even pop up his paws. So you could have a lot of fun with dimension here. But I'm just going to go ahead and glue things down. Love it. And then I'll need to decide on sentiments. So before I do that though, I do have my card base, which is just a 5x7 card blank that I have. I'm going to ink this up with some peacock feathers, which isn't great for stamping because it's just a distress ink, but it works great. It actually worked out really well. And I do need to pick up a sentiment for the inside, and I love the sentiment I chose, which basically says, "For my friend who knows where all the bones are buried." Yes. And then I have a sentiment picked out for the front. But we're going to go ahead and attach down our panel to our card base, and then that leaves a nice cream color border all the way around. Love that. We'll stamp out our sentiment on our scrap, and then we're going to trim this down using our guillotine trimmer. You're my favorite human. So great. And then we'll just glue that down as well, leaving a little bit hanging off, and then we can just trim that once it's dry. But once that's all lined up, that is going to finish off our card for today. I do love how this turned out, and I hope you do too. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And be sure to check out all that Miss Ink Stamps has going on over on Facebook and Instagram and our YouTube channel. Thanks for stopping by, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye, everybody.